whispers and rumors began circulating about the death of Teratmi, trivial gossip that originated from speculations and started being discussed among people, especially among the women who often gathered. However, one rumor stood out and became quite popular among the residents. Teratmi was suspected to be stressed after joining a religious study group in the neighboring village, according to the circulating rumors. However, it was unclear who first mentioned this gossip. They said the study group was led by a new man from the city. Since no other villagers attended the mentioned study group except for Teratmi, there was no one to confirm its truth. However, the rumor was enough to make the village head in Tegalsari uneasy, leading to a prohibition for the residents to participate in the study group in the neighboring village. 3 days before Teratmi's death, stories about ghosts began to surface. Although the news was not too loud, out of respect for her husband, Bang Ratmo. According to conversations I heard from mothers and their friends at home, the incident involved a woman, Mrs. Lastri, who used to offer credit for goods. Coincidentally, before Teratmi's death, she owed Mrs. Lastri some credit. They said it was around 10 at night when Mrs. Lastri, a widow watching TV alone because her young child was already asleep in the room, heard knocks on the window. Initially very soft, so Mrs. Lastri thought it was just a gecko. However, the second knock was loud enough to make her house window vibrate. Feeling surprised and annoyed, Mrs. Lastri thought it was mischievous children and immediately went out to open the door. But there was no one outside. As she stood looking around, suddenly, a whisper carried by the wind reached her ears. "Sorry, ma'am, I can't pay this week," the voice without a body uttered. Instantly, Mrs. Lastri's body felt cold, and her hair stood on end at the words. And when Mrs. Lastri turned her gaze towards the pathway in front of her house, where a woman wearing a floral-patterned house dress was walking away, heading towards darkness and disappearing into who knows where. News also came from the men who always patrolled the area. Some people who had experienced it while taking part in the patrol said that when passing by the side of Mr. Ratmo's garden, where Ratmi's tea plantation grave was located, they often heard the sound of a woman crying. What's even stranger is that the sound of crying seemed to come from within the ground. One person narrated the chronology, stating that at that time, Mr. Ratmo and some of his friends were patrolling, beating a drum. When they passed by the side of Mr. Ratmo's garden, they heard the faint crying of a woman, as if someone in pain. "Oh God, can you hear that?" said one of Mr. Ratmo's friends. For a moment, the group of 5 people fell silent, carefully listening to the crying of the woman in question. "Why does it sound like Ratmi's voice? Is it coming from underground?" whispered one of the patrol participants. The crying, which initially was faint, became clearer over time, according to Mr. Ratmo. The 5 people exchanged pale faces and glanced at each other. The crying grew louder, as if the weeping person was right beside their ears. And not long after, smoke was seen rising from the direction of Mr. Ratmo's garden. In panic, these people ran aimlessly. The next morning, the 5 night patrol officers led by Mr. Ratmo came to the village hall to complain to the village head, as no one wanted to join the patrol since that incident. "It's not just the patrol that's disturbed. Some villagers have experienced it too, right?" one of the officers asked. "Oh no, is this really happening? If it's just a rumor, we might offend their family," replied the village head. "But isn't it common for those who die unnaturally to become wandering spirits, sir?" argued one of the officers. "Hush! Don't watch too many ghost movies, Din," the village head retorted. "Sir, you weren't with us last night, but everyone here can testify. We clearly heard Ratmi's crying from inside the grave, maybe because she died by hanging, so she's being tormented by angels there. one of the officers explained. The village head began to consider the words of his villagers because, to him, it seemed unlikely that all 5 of them would make up such a story. This person is playful and dishonest, especially my father, who is probably considered too old to engage in mischievous activities like lying. However, the village head, Mr. Lura, looked very puzzled about how to solve this problem. So tonight, no one wants to join the patrol. Everyone nodded in response to Mr. Lura's question. How about inviting someone knowledgeable, sir? Suggested one of the villagers. An engineer, perhaps? No, I mean someone knowledgeable in supernatural matters. Like a religious scholar or a shaman, Mr. Lura. Well, that might not be appropriate. It could be misunderstood, especially if Mr. Ratmo, the husband, finds out. We might not be seen as respecting him. All present scratched their heads, appearing confused. Or how about this? For proof, tonight I will go on patrol. We need evidence that this is not just a rumor. If you, the witnesses, have experienced it, we'll have a reason to call a shaman without feeling too embarrassed in front of Mr. Ratmo. What kind of evidence do you mean, Mr. Lura? My father asked. I'll explain later. Tonight, is there anyone willing to accompany me on patrol? The 5 people sitting in front of Mr. Lura exchanged glances, but no one raised their hand or answered the question. Finally, my father volunteered to accompany Mr. Lura that night. I'll join too, Mr. Lura. If there are 3 of us, I dare to. Hey, also I'm curious. Another villager named Buran volunteered. According to my father, that night he arrived at the patrol post earlier, around 9 o'clock. The village was exceptionally quiet, especially after the rain in the afternoon. Since the rumors about Ratmi's tea ghost spread, villagers were hesitant to go out at night. The night wind was truly cold, my father said, and the eerie atmosphere added to the discomfort of the night. In the distance, they could hear the barking of dogs, a sign believed by some to indicate the presence of wandering spirits. Before long, Mr. Lura's companion, Mr. Buran, arrived. Has Mr. Lura arrived yet? My father just shook his head in response to Mr. Buran's question. Perhaps he didn't come because he's afraid. Let's go back, Mr. Buran suggested. Be patient. We promised to meet at 9 and it's only 10 minutes past 9. You're even late, hon. Love will find its way there, Mr. Lura, said Mr. Buran, pointing towards the pathway not far from the patrol post. My father's gaze focused on the figure pointed out by Mr. Buran, but it seemed unclear as it was only vaguely visible. The surroundings were dark since our village rarely had streetlights. Illumination came solely from the porch lights of residents' homes. That doesn't look like a woman, hon. Look, she's wearing a red house dress, my father said. The mysterious figure seemed to stand motionless in the distance. My father wanted to shine his flashlight to confirm, but he was afraid that if his assumption was wrong and it turned out to be Mr. Lura, it might be considered disrespectful. Oh, really? Mr. Buran got up from his seat and walked a few steps to confirm. My father followed from behind. According to my father, the mysterious figure was indeed a woman with long hair, her face covered by her hair. She wore a red house dress with floral patterns, standing still as if observing something. Who is she? Mr. Buran asked. Oh, just a passing villager, let it be. Actually, my father was aware, even without seeing her, that the figure haunting the villagers was likely the spirit of Ratmi. Moreover, my father remembered the clothing Ratmi wore when she hung herself. However, he didn't want to worsen the situation by scaring Mr. Buran. According to my father, after 10 minutes, Mr. Lura arrived, showing him a camera phone borrowed from his child. He said it could be used to record whether the speculations about Ratmi were true just rumors. My father didn't mention what he had just experienced, fearing that Mr. Lura might not believe him. That night, my father accompanied Mr. Lura to Ratme's tea plantation grave, traversing the muddy roads after the rain, illuminated by flashlights in the darkness. No conversation came from the three of them, only faint whispers of prayers from Mr. Burren in the background. The sky remained dark, with no stars visible, perhaps covered by clouds, and rain might fall again. "There's the grave, Mr. Lura," Mr. Burren pointed when they reached the intended place. "Hush, don't point at the tomb. It's considered taboo," Mr. Lura said. According to my father, that night was very quiet, with no sounds of crying like the previous night. However, my father noticed something peculiar among the bushes of banana trees. It looked like a head with perfectly round eyes observing them.